Kira Machado shares her honesty about leadership. She says leadership needs to change. Kira Machado is an educator at Centennial College in Canada, whose focus is on developmental services, a field of employment, she explains, that is growing. In this conversation with host Melanie Taddeo, Kira emphasizes that today's leaders need to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to have a seat at the table. Tomorrow's leaders will need to embrace the practices of empathetic care, humility, and inclusion. Now let's jump right into the conversation.
Good day and welcome to Connect for Life, the podcast. I'm your host, Melanie Taddeo, and today I'm joined by Kira Machado, who is a professor and program coordinator of the Developmental Service Worker Program at Centennial College. Kira, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Melanie. Thank you.
So, can you start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your leadership journey?
Sure. I am, as you mentioned, a professor and program coordinator in the Developmental Service Worker Program at Centennial College. I am also a graduate of the Developmental Service Worker Program at Centennial College. So I brought my career full circle to come back to Centennial and teach in the program where I graduated. When I left our Developmental Service Worker Program, I went to studied disability studies at TMU, and then pursued a master's degree in psychology and education at OISE. I spent many years in leadership in direct service of people with disabilities and advocating alongside individuals. And now I'm back providing leadership in the program and hoping to develop the next leaders in developmental services.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And that's a beautiful start to our conversation. I'm really excited about this conversation. I want to talk a little bit about what you think inclusive leadership looks like. What does it mean to you?
I think inclusive leadership is more about responsibility than it is about authority. Definitely within the space of education, it's about who we're making space for, who we're listening to within our classrooms, and who's benefiting from the decisions that we're making. Um, we need to make sure that as we develop capabilities for the next leaders in developmental services, that we are helping them to understand inclusion as something that doesn't get added on later, and that it's something that we build in from the very beginning. Um, that means we have to model it as leaders ourselves. So we have to make sure that we're being very inclusive in our leadership, in our classrooms, in the way that we're supporting people, listening to people, and including them in the decisions that get made. That's not always how education has worked, and especially not when we're talking about how education has excluded or excluded people.
Absolutely. Now, in your career or in your experience as an educator, have you seen situations where leaders definitely are excluding people with different abilities?
Yeah, for sure. I think accessibility still in education seems like an add-on, and sometimes it even seems like a luxury or a favor. And it's not, it's a right. And our leadership means refusing to compromise on that. That can be a really uncomfortable conversation and space to hold in the education arena, especially in higher education. Um, and there's an idea sometimes that accommodation can compromise rigor. And that's simply not true. Right? So we really have to make sure that we are holding the line as leaders when we're talking about that and making sure that people understand that people can learn in all sorts of different ways and people can express their learning in all sorts of different ways. And everybody deserves a seat at the table when it comes to education. And that's going to make the field, any field, not just the field of developmental services, but it's really going to make any field better.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you've not only experienced this in the sense of being able to change the narrative with your teachings with the upcoming leaders for tomorrow, but really it's something that I have observed as well myself through my leadership journey. It's just that they don't see individuals with disability as leaders. They don't see them, as contributing just as much. But in fact, a lot of individuals with various abilities have great, amazing opportunities if given it and showcase their gifts, talents, and abilities in leadership, and we learn so much from them. So I'm so glad to hear this. That's wonderful. So when you're working with the leaders of tomorrow, what do you think the skill sets are so essential for the leaders, for them to have to be the next set of leaders?
I think we're asking students to be culturally competent, trauma informed, um, to have humility, patience, and again, in systems that don't always model those values, and there really is a tension. And it's something that we have to name. Um, and we're not just teaching those skills, we're shaping how people are understanding dignity, autonomy, care. And in developmental services, that's really important. That requires time, reflection, relational learning. And it's not just about content delivery.
Very true. And I'm just going to get you to clarify, maybe for some of our listeners may not be aware of what developmental services is.
Sure. Developmental services is supporting individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities and autism across the lifespan. So, from birth all the way to end of life in any area that someone requires support. So, we're supporting or we're supporting students to support individuals in any place that someone would require or desire support in a way that is almost seamless, and it requires great dexterity of skills because people have the right to receive support in any part of their lives. It could be in the community, in education, in their homes, in employment. Um, we provide support in healthcare, anywhere that anyone requires support in any part of their life. And the goal of it is to help people um, have the most access to community and live the most meaningful life that they choose, a life full of self determination and autonomy, not a life directed by those providing support.
Thank you so much. That was a very comprehensive explanation that I'm sure now our listeners are fully included in the conversation. So thank you for that. I would love to hear your perspective of how important universal design is when it comes to leadership.
Think universal design is huge in leadership. We want to build those systems that have accessibility built in from the beginning. I think we see accessibility still as like the goal or the ceiling, and it's not. It's the ground floor, right? It's where we have to be, not where we are aiming to go. Um, but we just haven't got there. And so we need to start recognizing that we need to build access in for the most amount of people right from the beginning. We need to stop thinking about this as something that we think about later on. And when it comes to leadership, that means about thinking who are the people that I am supporting? Who are the people that I'm listening to? Who are the people that I'm working with? Who are the people who are at the table and who are the people who are not at the table? And if they're not there, why? What are the barriers? And what can I do to remove the barriers and make sure that the next time they aren't there for anyone else? And that's the part of universal design. It's not just accommodating it for one person, so one person gets a seat at the table. It's about removing the barriers so that now everyone can have a seat at the table all the time, right? We're not just making room for individual people. We're making sure that everything is accessible for the most amount of people possible. And it doesn't mean that individual people don't ever need accommodations. It's not one size fits all, and it's not meant to replace that. But it is a way of thinking about things to say, how do we want to build in equity in practice, not just in theory, and make places that are responsive and have the most voices here, because that's what's going to make systems safer for everyone. When you have just a certain amount of um, perspectives, voices, people being able to make decisions, it doesn't keep systems safe, right? Um, as a white cisgendered woman, I have a certain perspective. So it can't only be people who look like me, have backgrounds like me, who have resources like me, who get to make decisions, because that risks perspectives not being there. And so we need to make sure we're opening spaces out for everyone.
I definitely agree. And I remember when, way back when, the AODA, the Accessibility for People with Disabilities in Ontario, um, we are when it was first starting out, and I was part of the process of what that looked like, and it was a really great conversation, and we had such hope, and really optimistic that things were going to really change, and they have, but not to the level that we expected them to. And I think part of that is because there isn't universal design in leadership. And I think if we had implemented that at the same time as AODA, then I think perhaps we would be further ahead. But I am still optimistic that we are going to keep moving forward to reach that. But what do you think are some of the reasons why a universal design has not been implemented so much in leadership to this point?
Well, I too have great hopes, for sure. And I also agree that we're not where we need to be. Um, and I would say, I am a graduate of the developmental service worker program that I teach in now, and I graduated a few decades ago.
Yeah.
Much older. I don't want
Mhm.
to date
Yeah,
myself.
fair enough.
But I tell my students, when I left developmental service work, we were at the end of deinstitutionalization, right? Moving people out of the last institutions in Ontario, the closing of Huronia Regional Center, and moving people into the community. And we were very, very hopeful about what that meant for people rightfully having space in community, and moving into spaces where they should have autonomy, self-determination, friendship, community, access. And we were very hopeful. And decades later, I am teaching in the program, and we have come quite some way, but we're still very hopeful, right? We're not exactly where we need to be. And I agree in the same way as we look at the AODA and we look at where we are and what would help if we implemented universal design along the way. I think I completely agree. If we had these mindsets, we'd be a lot farther than we are. I think the issue in sometimes in implementing um universal design and inclusive leadership and in implementing any of these ideas, especially when it comes to really vulnerable people and especially people with disabilities, is the idea that it's much more difficult than it actually is.
Mhm.
I think people have an idea that it's so much harder. Um, than it is, or it takes longer, or it's more laborious. Um, which is not true, right? And we have a lot of research that says it's not true. Um, and I think some of those ideas are, linked to ableism and the ideas about what it takes to support and care about people with disabilities, and the ideas of people with disabilities as being burdens and needing care and being objects of pity. So I think there's a lot that comes from sort of those underlying um, unconscious bias that still exists around people with disabilities, that leads people to believe that it's so much harder to implement accessibility and universal design than it actually really is.
I,
Um,
I
once
totally agree. Absolutely. So well said. So, as an educator, what are you encouraging the young people who will be the leaders of tomorrow to really focus on when it comes to leadership?
uh, to be who they are, to take up space, to know their values. I think we have this, especially at Centennial, we have this amazing group of students who come with so many different backgrounds and experiences. And they're so incredibly diverse. They bring so much lived experience into the classroom that should be seen as an asset and not something that systems struggle to accommodate. And if we want to see that type of care in the field, culturally competent care, empathetic care, relational care. Colleges, leaders, communities, we need to model that type of humility and inclusion in how we design and deliver. So I encourage my students to embrace that about themselves. You have that ability to relate to people, to provide support to individuals that relates on a personal level, and that they are informed and educated. They have the skills and values that it will take to change and become change makers. So we really encourage them to do that and to advocate and take up space, which can be really challenging, especially when they're navigating inaccessible systems for the people they support and for themselves.
Mhm. Absolutely. And that's great advice for the leaders of tomorrow. Now, my next question is, what advice do you give leaders that are leading individuals with various abilities? What kind of advice would you give to them?
Take the time to get to know people, listen to people, listen to their stories, get to know people on a, like a relational level. I think there are so many gifts, talents, things that people offer that are unique and can open up so many doors and innovate, and add to conversations that when we get busy, when we get tasky, when we want to move quickly, we don't see or hear. So it is really important to take time for that. I think it's also important to amplify voices that aren't heard. So, my voice isn't always the one that needs to be heard. I need to amplify voices that aren't there. And sort of, use my power and positionality to to give other people the mic when I can. Um, so that's really important too, is to use your power to amplify as an ally wherever you can.
Wonderful. Great advice as well. What does say 10 years from now, what would your vision for inclusive leadership look like 10 years from now?
10 years from now, I hope there's a lot less people who look like me in leadership positions, to be completely honest. I hope there's a lot less, you know, white men in leadership positions, if
Mhm.
I'm completely honest. I hope leadership looks as diverse as the field, as our communities, as the people who are served, because it doesn't. And, it's uncomfortable to say that. It's not the most comfortable thing to voice right now, but that is the truth. That's what needs to happen. I'm not unaware of that, and I wouldn't be telling the truth if I glossed over it. Leadership needs to change. Um, and if we're truly working to build something that is better, then that's what we need to be working towards. I hope leadership at every level includes the voices of those that it serves. I hope that it includes many, many diverse voices. If we look at leadership at every level, the voices of people with disabilities are glaringly absent in most cases. So that really needs to change. Racialized voices are often missing. And if you look at the intersection of racialized and disabled voices together, you're not going to find many. So we really need to be looking at that. How do we amplify those leaders in the community?
And that's beautiful. And honestly, you and I are on the same page. I would love to see that in the next 10 years. That would be great. We would definitely have accomplished our goals with the work that we do. Now, obviously, your students are learning so much from you, and it's been such a pleasure speaking with you. But where can our listeners learn more about yourself, the work you're doing, and anything else you want to share?
They can check out our website on the Centennial College website webpage. I would be remiss to not mention my amazing colleague Joanna Niles, who is doing incredible work right now with the college in the space of AI and support for individuals with disabilities, and is just one of the most amazing faculty. I'd say she's the smartest person I've ever met. So you can find out more about Joanna and I on the on our Centennial College webpage. Find out more about our developmental service worker program there. We encourage people. Our program is actually at risk right now, and I think that's due to sort of the way that the college system is really under pressure. Um, we need more developmental service workers. We're actually one of the areas that is projected to have the highest growth in employment in the next 5 to 10 years. And yet we are at risk of being a program that's closed because of enrollment. And people aren't enrolling to become developmental service workers. And we're seeing that also as a reflection of the changes to the international enrollment. So, there are so many jobs in developmental service work and not enough developmental service workers. So please, we encourage people who are interested in working in the field to check out the developmental service worker program and see if it is a fit for them. We need more leaders.
Absolutely. And I encourage our listeners to definitely check out the information on the Centennial College website. And this is so important to hear, Kira, because I didn't know that. And we know with the population maturing in age and the different aspects, developmental service workers are essential. And as you mentioned, there's lots of employment opportunities. So if you're interested, to our listeners, to learn more, please check out their website and definitely consider the options of your career and moving forward. Thank you so much. And I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Melanie. I appreciate it so much. It's been great talking to you as always.
Until next time.
You have been listening to Connect for Life, the podcast. Connect for Life is a Canadian-based registered charity committed to eliminating barriers for people with disabilities. Visit connect4life.ca and join us in helping people with disabilities become the champions of their growth stories.